Welcome to the Tour Operator Growth Podcast, where we share the strategies, systems, and real-world lessons helping tour operators grow more direct bookings, spend less time buried in admin, and build stronger businesses. Brought to you by Resmark, the leading team behind booking software, websites, marketing services, and digital waivers built for tour operators by people who still actually run tours. Now, let's get into today's episode. Today, we're getting into something almost nobody in this industry plans for until it is too late. How to step back from, hand off, or sell the business you've spent your life building. And I found the right guest for that. Pat Tabor spent nearly 30 years at the consulting firm RSM, where he led their national transition and advisory practice and did close to 500 business valuations. That's a lot. Then he bought his own outfitting business, ran it, and handed it down to his kids in 2019. So he understands the financials at the highest level, and he's actually lived the transition himself. Today, he runs Swan Mountain Consulting Group, helping outfitters and tour operators plan, build value, and exit with confidence. Pat, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate being here.
Awesome. Well, I think I want to start here. It's probably a big question that a lot of people have, and they don't want to hear the term exit planning, or when they do hear it, they start tuning out because they're not ready to sell anytime soon. Why should tour operators that aren't planning to sell anytime soon tune into this episode today?
Well, that's a great question. And what I've been telling a lot of clients is just because you're not ready to retire doesn't mean you should not plan to retire. And what I mean by that is there's a whole bunch of different transition points as a company is going through its life cycle. And essentially everything most people do in their business will lead to an ultimate conclusion. Whether they plan that conclusion or not is kind of up to them. And so because every business is unique, you need to really chart a path. Even if you don't intend on doing anything too tremendously different for the next 10 or so years, you still have to line things up, because what we've noticed is that the time to start planning any form of exit, transition, whatever, isn't, if you want to get out now, it would have been like maybe 5 years ago. So you can never start soon enough, and you'll have a better outcome and an outcome that you really have worked towards this if you start your planning sooner rather than later.
When a tour operator comes to you, one of the first things you often do is figure out what stage they're in. Can you walk us through what that means and how you go about doing that?
Yeah, it's an insightful question, Greg. And one of the frames that I like to use is what is a classic standard thing taught in business school and has been for, I don't know, a gazillion years, but it's the business life cycle. And so, most of us would recall that it's very simple in design. You have the startup phase, growth, maturity, exit. And every time you hit one of those particular transition points in a company, it brings about a whole bunch of different challenges, and whether or not the people running the business are really coping with that particular phase of the life cycle. So by using it as a tool, and we know where they're at, it helps us then understand and focus on the types of things they need for their business and for the people involved in their business at that stage of the company. Because as you transition through each stage of a company, your needs change very significantly. And it's important to be fixing the right things at the right time, at the right stage of that company's life cycle.
When we're talking about life cycles, is it obvious for companies to know where their life cycle is? Is there any tips you could give them to say, okay, this is a life cycle I'm in, or do most people already know what life cycle they're in?
It's funny. I think they know where they are, but the reality is they could be experiencing, depending on what faction of the company you look at, they could be at different phases. So for instance, their operations may be relatively stable and mature, but they may be still very much in the growth stage when it comes to their marketing and outreach. In fact, they may be still in startup phase. So it's not perfectly synchronized. All the different functions within a company typically aren't all hitting on the same cylinders at the same time. And so that's what creates this kind of disruption or interrupt between jumping back and forth between cycles. This is particularly the case between startup and growth, and growth and maturity. Just when you think you've got it all nailed and you're stopping the growing concept and you think you're maturing and you're stabilized, you can be thrusted right back in because things change outside your control, and the process reiterates. So it's just a tool, there's nothing that you follow that is like, oh, today we just crossed the line, we're now in the maturity phase. It's dynamic, but it is helpful in terms of trying to understand what ails companies and where their focus should be, in trying to perform better and ultimately get to the type of outcome they're seeking.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, cool. What actually drives the value of a tour business? So when a buyer is looking at an outfitting company or a tour business, what are they actually valuing?
Well, Nikki, one of the things that I've done is I've developed a proprietary tool where I try to measure what we refer to as value drivers. So when anybody comes along, like when business valuation specialists, whoever, look at a business, there's different things that drive value within a business. The obvious things are things that I think we all recognize. Like a certain brand can have remarkable value just by the name. Like everybody recognizes that has intrinsic value. But there's other things about it, and you have to look at it through the lens of a buyer. Like what does the buyer value if it's going to take this over? So they're going to look at things like leadership and the management. They're going to look at planning, the financial structure, the infrastructure, the people, the operations. And one of the things that they're really, really focusing on lately is technology and how turnkey that technology is. In light of all the phenomenal developments in AI, and then also when you track what's happening in the outfitting and tourism business and how reliant it is on technology, not only for acquiring customers, but then properly managing them throughout the cycle of initial sign up to after departure and making sure they were satisfied. It's just super incumbent or super important that they have an integrated solution. So I've dealt with a lot of companies, even as of late, where virtually every other aspect of the value of the business is pretty solid, but their technology is behind. And so then what the buyer does is effectively penalize the seller for being somewhat behind the times, because they know they're going to have to make that investment on top of what's already the investment of purchasing the company. So value drivers are those things that can honestly be evaluated or scored in terms of where this particular target company, this seller, rates amongst all the other companies within its competitive field. And the ones that are hitting on all the cylinders and have a fully integrated technology system, great people, solid management, a great risk management program, they're the ones that are going to get the highest rewards in terms of valuation versus others that are coming up short in some of those categories.
Do you see that when people are looking to value, are they looking more at the technology side of things when it comes to value, or more at the infrastructure and ability to come in and take over an operation that's going to be, kind of easygoing already?
I'd almost say, Greg, it's like an and both, not an either or scenario. So each one of these are contributors to how much effort the buyer's going to have to put in getting this company to operate at the level that justifies the investment. And so, there'll be some kind of gauging with regards to, okay, they're strong here, but they're weak there. And then they try to quantify what it's going to take to shore up that weakness. It's really easy to understand if they have like a physical building. So let's just say that they're a tour operator that has a really a building in a great location. But when you go to look at the building, it's dilapidated. The roof is going to need replacement. The floors are that beautiful 1960s tile type format, or linoleum. They realize in order to bring that up to running, to a standard that guests expect, they're going to have to put money on top of what they have to pay this operator. And that's where the penalty phase comes in. And I've seen it a lot in the technology thing that you mentioned, is that there's so many great tools out there that operators should be using, that'll not only make their own lives better and easier and streamline their functions and quite frankly, lower costs, because once you streamline, you can do that, but it also make them more attractive as a target when they ultimately decide to exit.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's move on to a different question. We had you on a webinar previously, and you said something along the lines of the biggest failure is planning the business transition, but forgetting the owner. What do you mean by that? Can you expound on that?
Well, most people are so focused on the business and what's happening within the business and what they're going to get. They don't really look at it from the lens of what do the owners actually need, both financially, in terms of what literally proceeds they need and what format they need the proceeds to be. But also how well set up are they for the next stage of life? And probably the most significant thing that tends to occur is people that have defined their life, almost their existence based on their entrepreneurship and ownership of a company, they haven't really given consideration as to what's next. And so what happens is there's this void. It's like, what am I going to do now? One of the things I always challenge owners that have such connection to their companies is, let's just assume that in the last third of your life, there's three phases. There's the go, the slow go, and the no go. And what that really defines is the last third of your life, let's call it maybe 30 or so years, you're going to have a lot of energy at first. And I've referred to that as the 15 summers. What would you do if you knew that you only had 15 summers left to go do the things that you have never been able to find time to do because you've been so committed to this business? So there's this soft side of transition planning that has nothing to do with the business. It has to do with, what are you going to do when you grow up? What's next? What comes next? And so that's what I mean by really taking care of the owner, not only looking at what their financial needs, because there is a life cycle for the owners that parallels the life cycle of a business, but also take care of the emotional needs and all the issues that are going to need to be attended to as they go through this incredible transition.
So can I ask you, Pat, what did you do when you grew up? So when you obviously transitioned the business to the kids, did you know right away you were going to start the consulting group, or did you travel for a while? What did you do when you grew up?
Well, I know my family will accuse me of never growing up, so let's just be clear on that. The other thing I will point out is that the consulting group was running parallel to me being an outfitter. It was kind of my mechanism for off-season work, and also, contributing back to the industry. So I've been doing the recreational consulting the whole time I was operating as an outfitter, and now I just exclusively do the consulting. I tried a lot of things. I spent 100 days in fishing and hunting that year, and got amazingly bored with it. And part of it was because I was able to do these things, but all my friends and everything were still tied up doing stuff. And so I did a lot of it by myself, which isn't fun. I also, it was difficult for me to just come off. It was like getting off of a train and then watching the train leave. And it's like, okay, well, now what? And so even my morning routines, getting up at a certain hour and turning on your computer and going through all the little rituals we all do, that all gets interrupted. And you just never realize how significant it is until you stop. And so there's this reinvention that has to occur. Some people are really well prepared for it, and it's like they just hit the pavement running. Others kind of grovel their way through it. And I think it's safe to say that's what I did. I think for the first couple of years, I was really just kind of trying to figure things out. And as more distance and separation occurs, we're starting to really uh, backfill and do the things that fill that void and the energy that I used to get from being so heavily involved as an operator.
And you passed you transitioned your business to your kids, right? Was it hard to like pass it on to your family where you're probably still seeing the business and a little bit more involved than you would be if you just sold it to some random person? Is it hard to like see your kids fail potentially and not want to step in and say, "Hey, do it this way. This is how it's been done for the last however long."
Greg, I can't tell you how hard it is. Family businesses are extraordinarily complex because in many ways you can't fire your family. And so the lack of functionality and the kind of unusual dynamic that creeps into companies that are family oriented is intense. Um, I think you guys have all heard this, maybe seen or heard about the crazy program on HBO, Succession, where it gets to a level of absurdity. But I'm here to tell you that every single family has their own challenges, and ours was no exception. I thought I had this thing nailed because here I am in a consultant and everything else, and I just underestimated the impact of certain things like how my kids would get along making decisions themselves instead of me being the primary decision maker. And again, the emotion of watching them make changes. A lot of people get a kick out of the fact that I reminisce on one of the early decisions they were considering was changing the logo of the company, and I was really proud of that logo. And so, after I heard that, I went and sulked in the corner because I thought, they're taking me out into the field and they're going to put me out of my misery kind of thing. That's what it felt like. So when you have a lot of pride of authorship and everything and you see change occurring, it's pretty hard. It's not only hard on the people departing, but it's also hard on the people that retain are there trying to make their best effort to take it forward. And there's a lot of guilt on their part, like, oh, if we do this, will Dad be upset? Or what's the matter with Dad? He seems grumpy. What's going on here? So I just cannot, overstate the importance of really being clued in on all the emotional and psychological issues that come to play when you're dealing with family business transition. It's super, super complex.
When you're consulting, are you usually seeing that people are transitioning over to family, or is it outside of family?
As a percentage, I don't think it's high as 50-50. And interestingly enough, like if I'm doing a full-blown transition planning engagement, I've had a number of instances where the family started off thinking they were going to do a family transition succession plan, but after doing the upfront work of transition planning, the conclusion was that's not a viable option. That keeping it in the family probably is not the best optimal outcome for everybody involved. So a lot of times the first gen, we call them, the founders or the people that started the company, are under the assumption that the kids just are chomping at the bit to take it over. But remarkably, there's a lot of second gen and third gen people that say, honestly, I just want to go do something different. I'm not sure that I want to live the same lifestyle that mom and dad did. I think I want to do something different. And it's so important that a process flushes that out, because if you don't, big mistakes will be made. And that's why the percentage of failure on successions and family successions is super high. It's alarmingly high. 70-80% of successions don't work. The reason they don't work is they aren't planned properly and people aren't being honest about the emotions surrounding it and whether it really is the right course of action to keep it in the family versus selling it, letting the parents cash out, letting the kids move on and go do something different.
Yeah.
lot of emotions tied to something that is your baby, and you work so hard, and your plan all along was to pass it down to your kids. And I'm assuming maybe there's some listeners that their plan is to pass it down to their kids, even if they're just starting their business right now, or, that's hard. But a plan, that's what's important, is having a plan, talking to somebody like you.
Critical.
Yeah, and being able to be open about it too. My wife's from small town Idaho, and a lot of her friends' parents are farmers, and the same type of thing happens where, they're passing the family business down to the next generation, but a lot of them don't actually want to do that. And if you're not open about that as the children, then you might just fall into line and be like, yep, this is what I'm supposed to do. And in 3 years, you're just going to hate everything about your job now because you're not doing what you actually want to do. Maybe you always just wanted to be a guide. You didn't care about taking over the business. And so that open, honest, especially with family, being open and honest about it is probably the best thing. Do you see a lot of, transitions that happen to, say, Gen 2 or Gen 3, and then within a few years, they're selling it off to someone else because it just wasn't the right fit?
Alarmingly high, Greg. That's, again, a very intuitive thing on your part. The assumption that they're going to put in their 25 or 30 years just like mom and dad. That is not happening. In fact, I'm dealing with, it seems like with every generation that comes, the lifespan of how long they'll hold the company is shortened. So when you look at Gen X, who's now starting to exit, fairly steadily, the percentage, because we're moving full into Gen X ownership right now as we're tailing on the baby boomers. But millennials in particular as business owners, because that's the primary generation that is taking over businesses, they have a very much shorter runway. And, it's not uncommon to see an exit in the 5 to 10 year range. Like, we gave this a good run. It was fun. We're going to cash out. Now we're going to go do something different. So similar to the fact, like, you very rarely see anybody go work for a company 9 to 5, for 30 years of their career. They're, quote, company men or company women. It's the same thing that happens even in business ownership. There's a lot of desire to move around, do different things, live in different parts of either the country or even the world. And so the lifespan of holding on to a business is shortening as we're moving into these new generations that are taking over.
And this is just me really actually being interested in understanding this a little bit, but being a millennial myself, do you feel like the millennials that are taking over, are they exiting, let's say 5 to 10 years later because they want to go do something else? Or have they also grown the business in a way that now it's valued at a much higher position than it was when their parents were in charge or the previous owner?
Well, what I would say is probably the biggest issue related to all this is more they watch their parents make almost unreasonable sacrifices. And, they look at the unreasonable sacrifice part and say, is this the way we want to spend our next 20 or 30 years? And the answer tends to be no. One of the things that I always tell baby boomers, and to a certain extent X, when they say, well, why are millennials this way? Well, guess what? Who raised them? You did. You raised them to have more option. You raised them to look at the world in totality. You gave them all this choice. And then when they exercise their free choice, you're mad, which always cracks me up. And it's like, no, they have watched and observed the level of sacrifice. And although there's appreciation for that, it's like, I'm not going to do that. I want something different. And so, when I look at even my own kids, which are both millennials, and what their options are, I guarantee you that they will exit much sooner than I did. Because they've got a lot of life they want to live, and they're just not going to, check out and bring it right to the end in just being a business owner. And that's okay. I think that's perfectly healthy. But the financial piece is insightful, Greg. That is happening too. I mean, if you work really, really hard and build this thing up, you can have a quick payday and then exit and go do something different. And so there are people that are behaving that way as well and doing quite well at it. I saw one family that took over from their parents and within 8 years doubled the size and cashed out at a valuation easily double what would have happened if they would have sold it.
That's impressive. It's going to be interesting to see. Obviously, we understand boomers and millennials and see, I'm a zillennial, they call it. So what's under the millennials?
Z.
It's gonna, yes, Gen Z. Sorry, I'm just so
Gen
used
Z.
to the term zillennial, but Gen Z, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. Well, they're already in the workforce. It changes every single generation, so time will tell. But Pat, if you can give a tour operator, outfitters listening to this episode, kind of a starting place, some advice, or let's just say one piece of advice, what would you say to them?
Well, start planning. I don't care how you do it, whether it's go sit down on a rock or, go climb a mountain by yourself or whatever, but start thinking about what's next. And very quickly form a team of people that will help you with this process, because a lot of operators are very much the DIYers, right? They think they can do virtually everything themselves. That's their entrepreneurial spirit, and I appreciate that. But there's something really valuable from getting perspectives from the outside looking in. And I always encourage people to hire truth tellers. Don't hire your best friend or the family CPA or lawyer or whatever that, doesn't want to offend you. Hire people that have skills, that have experience, that can tell you the truth about what's really going on with your life and your company so you can make good decisions. But if I were to say, if there's one thing, start planning now, because the plan that you put together now will come to fruition somewhere down the line. If you have some idea where you want to be down the line, but you don't put a plan together, it's the equivalent of showing up at a job site with all the materials, labor, and everything else, but not having a blueprint to follow in terms of how you're going to construct that home. It just doesn't make sense to not have a plan as to where you want to go.
Awesome, Pat. Last one for you. If people want to connect with you and the team at Swan Mountain Consulting Group, where should they start?
Probably the easiest thing to do is just jump on the website. It's swanmountainconsulting.com. And there's some other rag outfit out there that took the word Swan. Don't be dissuaded. You have to look for this pudgy old face on the website. Then you'll know you're on the right website. And swanmountainconsulting.com. My phone number is right on there. You can give me a call. You can also get a hold of me through American Outdoors or any of the associations, because I'm pretty heavily involved in them.
Awesome. And for anybody listening, I will put the link to the website right in the show notes. Pat, thank you so much for coming on today's episode of the Tour Operator Growth Podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was great talking with you guys. Have a great day.
That's it for today's episode of the Tour Operator Growth Podcast. If you got value out of today, follow the show wherever you listen and leave us a quick review. It's the best way to help other operators find it. And if you want help putting any of this to work in your own tour business, book a call with the team at resmarksystems.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next one.